Welcome everybody back into NerdSesh. As always, I'm Carson Breber, and alongside me is Logan Camden, and we hope that you have had a very Merry Christmas, and there was lots of great sports. The most loaded day in terms of NBA and NFL action on Christmas because we did have the 3 football games. So we are going to be talking about all of that today, but we'll start with the NFL just because we had one of the most hyped up matchups of the season on that Monday night slot between the Ravens and the Niners who have been the Super Bowl favorite in our eyes and the general consensus, and the Ravens went and took it to them, Logan. And we had this whole conversation last week about our top 10 quarterbacks in the NFL today, and we discussed Brock Purdy in that range. Brutal game for him with the 4 interceptions in this blowout. Do you feel like he got exposed at all in this game?
That's a good question, and I don't know if exposed is the right word. I guess it's kind of how you view Purdy. I do think we learned something major about Purdy in this game and about the 49ers. 2 things, really. One, I don't know if Purdy can be the guy. I guess that is the question, right? Because you see he digs himself such a big hole at the beginning of this game, and I was intrigued because when you got 3 interceptions early in the second quarter, you're rattled. And I felt like this was the first time, Carson, in all of Purdy's young career that we really got to see under the fire if he could bounce back, from such a bad hole. Like against a great defense when you've already been having such a bad game. And we saw he couldn't. The only successful offense that the Niners were able to generate down the rest of the game was when they handed the ball off on the left side is what it felt like. And it is a glaring weakness, Carson, that we need to be worried about with Shanahan and the 49ers. The big stat that's been going around recently, the Niners are 1-32 when the Niners enter the fourth quarter down 3 points. I know that was my chief concern for the 49ers at the start of this year when they were rattling off win after win. Can they play from behind? Can they play with a deficit? In the entire Purdy and Shanahan era, specifically the Shanahan era too, the Niners have proven that they cannot play from behind. They cannot cut into leads. They cannot play their way back into the games. They have to get their foot on the other team's neck early and accelerate from then. So that to me is my big concern about the Niners moving forward, Carson. And can Purdy have great games in the playoffs? Because we've seen it in years previous. You don't have to be perfect every game of the playoffs. But there is going to be one game, at least one, come playoff time where the quarterback has to elevate his play and go above and beyond to carry his team through. And Purdy has yet to prove that he's an elevator. You know what I mean? Again, we both had him in our top 10. Or you had Purdy in your top 10 as well, correct?
I had him number 9 among the healthy quarterbacks as of today. I would have him probably 13 if we brought back Herbert, Burrow, Rodgers, and Kirk.
And yeah, I think I'm in the same boat with you. Purdy has yet to prove that he's an elevator, that he can put his team on his back and carry them through tough times. And that has to be a concern heading into the playoffs, and that's a distinct advantage that other real contenders still have over them. All of these teams have their fatal flaws, have their question marks, but the Eagles have a QB advantage. The Ravens clearly have a QB advantage. The Chiefs, despite all their flaws, still have that major QB advantage. And yeah, I don't know if exposed is the right word, but again, Purdy's going to have to step up come playoff time, and this was a less than resounding answer that he can answer the call when they need him to in the playoffs.
I think you hit the nail on the head with the first thing that you said, which is that this really depends on your perspective on Brock Purdy. If you have been beating the drum, calling him Drew Brees with more athleticism and the MVP of the league, and I saw somebody comment on one of our videos recently that he is without question the most valuable player to any team in the NFL, then you've had a reality check here. And what you've seen is that Purdy, I still believe, is legitimately good, but is absolutely a beneficiary of offensive heaven, playing with the best collection of weapons, I believe, ever, and one of the 2 best offensive minds in football. The same situation that made Jimmy G a top 3 quarterback by a lot of these efficiency stats and brought them nearly to a Super Bowl victory with him at the helm when he sucked the whole time. So that's where the situation has always been important to consider when we look at the statistical production from Purdy and all of these things. To me, this showed that he is just where we had him. He's in that Jared Goff tier. He's a slightly above average starting quarterback in a fully healthy league. He's capable of some disaster classes like this. And the 4 turnovers for him are tough because a couple of them are deflections, right? One of them, his arm is getting hit as he throws the ball. Really only the first one when they're driving would I say that's just a flat out bad read, right? He should see that Kyle Hamilton has the angle to come and make that play on that ball, and he doesn't. The others are sort of these, not freak plays, but it's not like he literally just misread or made a wildly inaccurate throw in a vacuum. So it's not like I watched this and thought, oh my God, Brock Purdy can't play quarterback. He just had some really bad moments against an elite defense. And you can't put him in the top 5 tiers because he's not the caliber of elevator, of one-man offense that those kind of guys are. And when you do have a team that is significantly putting him under pressure, like, yeah, he has the ability to make guys miss to a certain extent. He's pretty solid there, and he has some creativity as an offensive player, but he's just not going to excel, and he can be overwhelmed. So do you regret having him as a top 10 guy?
Not at all. And I again, box score people are going to look at these numbers and they are going to go. Again, we just live in such a right here, right now world where everything is reactionary and everything is, what's the hot take? Well, the hot take now is that, Purdy's not top 15. Purdy's fully made by the Niners, right? And I do think it's funny because, Carson, we caught a lot of flack, not only on our video. We made a graphic afterwards and put it on social. A ton of people in our Instagram comment section crying, laughing emojis. You guys have the MVP of the league at 9. You have Purdy. It's ridiculous to me because, again, we never really considered him in that tier. And no, I don't. Yeah. Considering the state of the league, considering the guys that are hurt, I don't have an issue with putting Purdy there. And I think on a normal given Sunday, Purdy's going to play better than this. And I think you make a really great point, too, about the interceptions. If you just look at the 4 picks, look, man, that stat line's never good. But 2 of those throws, as you mentioned, are him going through his progressions, and there's just mistiming with the receivers. McCaffrey's not ready for a ball on an in route. Kittle's not ready for another pass. And those easily turn into interceptions. I think Purdy is a top 10 QB. I mean, maybe the one thing that I should take away from this is maybe him and Tua is a little closer than I
it's
made
real
before.
Close.
You know what I mean? Because Purdy's obviously a little more turnover prone than I expected. But again, within context, this is the number 1 defense in the NFL. They have some of the best defensive playmakers in the NFL. They were getting pressure all night long. And if I'm going to toot my own horn, shout out Theo Ash NFL. I know he's been high on the guy since he came into the league. So have I. Kyle Hamilton's one of the best damn safeties in the league, and he made some huge plays here tonight. So, again, it's within context. It's within wherever you had him before. I think Purdy is somewhere between top 10 to fringe top 10. He is a good quarterback that just was outmatched by a superior defense, and this was a bad game from him. He's just not an MVP caliber player, and I think that's a tough pill that a lot of people are going to have to swallow. It's not just numbers. It's what you do against great teams, and Purdy didn't answer the call, man. I don't regret having him in my top 10 at all. But I know there are probably a lot of people that certainly regret having him as their MVP and in their top 5 if they had him there because he got elevated into conversations like that.
I don't regret where I had him either. Maybe I would move him a spot or 2. Goff is a better pure arm talent, but he is more of a statue in the pocket to me. He's not as creative a playmaker as Purdy, and he does also have some of these really ugly games where he will turn the ball over 3 or 4 times. Tua, I think, is a better quarterback within 2 seconds of the snap in structure. He's just a bit more accurate. I think his timing is even a bit more precise. Like the things that Purdy's really good at in those situations, I think Tua is even a little bit better. But then I do think that Purdy is still a bit better as a creator out of structure. Like he's in that tier somewhere, whether it's a spot or 2 lower. That's the conversation that he belongs in. And you raised an important question, which is, can you win the Super Bowl with a guy like that? Because we have seen the trend in recent years. It is overwhelmingly the elite quarterbacks in this league winning Super Bowls. It's Patrick Mahomes. It's Matt Stafford in a career season as a top 5 quarterback. It's Tom Brady. It's Patrick Mahomes. It's Tom Brady. Even the Nick Foles year, I mean, I'll be damned if he wasn't playing like an elite quarterback in that run. And I have said before that although I do think that Purdy is actually good, he is the one thing that can sort of derail this 49ers team because we saw it in the 3-game skid. What was the big difference? Well, they were down a couple of key offensive players, Debo, Trent Williams, and when Purdy was asked to do more, he really, really struggled. And now, if you look at their 4 losses this year, Purdy has been really bad in those games. He's 3 touchdowns to 9 picks. And in their wins, he has been nearly perfect statistically. 26 touchdowns to 2 picks, over 10 yards per pass attempt. But he does have to prove that he can thrive in those situations where things are more adverse, where he has to carry a heavier load. The question to me is, though, could this year be an exception where the competition is so flawed and the Niners are just so stacked that they can still get by? I think through the NFC, it probably is. I think that they can dominate basically any team in the conference where they won't have to be playing from behind. I mean, presuming health, Purdy won't have to go above and beyond and be exceptional. But the Ravens are the scary team in that equation because this defense is unbelievable, and they have that superstar quarterback who is going to show out every single game. Maybe that is the difference maker.
That was a big takeaway for me, Carson, too. I'm glad you bring that up. One of my takeaways from this game, I wrote this down in the first half when it was still close, but the Super Bowl is wide open. And you made this case a couple of weeks ago talking about the parity between teams, how everybody is fatally flawed. I think the Super Bowl is wide open, and I think the Ravens are probably the front runner now because of that quarterback advantage. I mean, you see the disaster from the Chiefs. It seems like the bottom is falling out there. They have hit their skid. The Eagles hit their skid. The Cowboys are doing their Cowboys thing. The Niners play good competition, and they get housed here. Like, it seems like Baltimore is kind of taking that. And again, I don't want to be overreactionary to 1 week, but the Niners were the best team in football. We had all crowned them. They take on real competition. Baltimore just seems like they have a real distinct advantage offensively. And again, I think you're right too, Carson. That's the one box that Purdy has not checked. When they're playing on ahead, when they can run McCaffrey down teams' throats and play their game, they can do it. But I've seen Lamar in adverse situations, and I've seen Lamar overcome and take this team on final drives. Purdy hasn't done that. Currently, right now, I'll go ahead and spoil it. I am really rooting heavily for a Browns-Lions or a Steelers-Lions Super Bowl.
Steelers. That'll be great.
That would be awesome, right? A Mason Rudolph, Jared Goff showdown in the Super Bowl. But Browns-Lions would be awesome, man. Can you imagine Joe Flacco, Jared Goff dueling it out?
I mean, not really. I can't imagine that
right?
in any realistic world. That's not going to happen, Logan. We're not playing some sort of fantasy game here. I still think this was the Super Bowl preview. I think right now these teams both stand head and shoulders above everybody else in their conference. The Bills, I think, are hot, but I mean, they had an underwhelming performance this week. The Ravens have just been more consistently great as a football team. And both teams have top 3 quarterbacks, unbelievable one-man offensive engines who are going to make you a top 5 unit on that side of the ball, even if they don't have great personnel around them. But to me, the gap is the defense. I mean, the Ravens are unbelievable, dude. I was just thinking, like, how many Pro Bowlers are on this defense? I'm just going to throw out names, okay? Kyle Hamilton, I think, is an All-Pro. Matabike is going to be a Pro Bowler for sure. I think Jadeveon has had an unbelievable season. He's probably a Pro Bowler. Geno Stone, big-time playmaker, probably a Pro Bowler. Roquan Smith has to be a Pro Bowler. Humphrey, probably because he's missed a handful of games, won't make it, but he's Pro Bowl caliber.
I mean, you think Patrick Queen, too?
That's the next guy who I was about to say. In that, like, I think there are 6 legit Pro Bowlers, and then you have Brandon Stevens, Michael Pierce, Marcus Williams, Kyle Van Noy. You have dudes who aren't even starters. I mean, Van Noy doesn't start for most of the season. And then you have Owe, you have Malik Harrison, Ronald Darby's playing well. It's just like, what the hell? Like, how did they get this many quality players? It's unbelievable, and they've certainly revitalized some guys, and I think the culture and the coaching here is amazing. It's a really impressive blend of that and this high-end talent. That, to me, is the separator between them and the other AFC teams where they have these great quarterbacks, but the Chiefs are just too flawed offensively. We'll talk about them in a little bit. I don't know if this moves Baltimore above San Francisco for me, just because I do think this is an outlier game because of the 5 turnover factor. And, of course, Baltimore is a big-time defense. They made big-time plays. But that sort of gap, a +5 turnover differential, you just can't expect that to be replicated. And it's not like the Niners were incapable of moving the ball.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they drove down the field, and then they had a turnover. Sometimes they would have the turnover before they could get things started, but when they could sustain a drive without turning the ball over, they did fine. I mean, they averaged more yards per play in this game. They gained more total yards. Those numbers are inflated a bit by the end when you're basically in garbage time, but just overall, a huge portion of this game was disastrous field position. The Ravens got the ball in scoring position 3 different times in this game, and the Niners gave it up as they were about to score once. So it's not like the Ravens went out there and hung 450 yards on them and the Niners had 200 yards total offense. I still believe in the Niners formula. I do, because I think that defense is elite, and I think that there's the dichotomy of Lamar always having to do more versus a guy like Purdy, but also having more faith in Lamar to do that exceptional stuff. I came into this game liking the Niners more. I think I like them slightly more still. But it's tough, man. That quarterback trust factor is real. Lamar is in complete control of the game right now. He is playing at the highest level he ever has. And the MVP conversation has gotten so tired this year because every single week we flip. But the MVP right now is Lamar Jackson. I don't care if his raw production, his touchdown total isn't up to the standard of a traditional MVP. Nobody has been more impactful transforming a unit for an elite football team this entire season than Lamar Jackson. That's what we said at the midseason point. That's how I feel right now.
I concur. And that's the difference to me, Carson. You already said it. It's Lamar. That's the difference to me between these two teams. And I still think that has to be a red flag. Like I said earlier, dude, that's the next step for Brock Purdy, that proving that he can do this in adverse situations. Again, this is hard, and that's why you should also take this, not with a grain of salt. This is a big result, but when you're in those games, when everything's not going right, it's so much harder to change the energy and to change the tide and to completely turn it around for you, instead of when you've dug yourself that hole and it's, man, I got to go back out here and I got to try to get back on course. Purdy is a big-time rhythm guy, and if you can get him flustered early, he's a little easier to throw off. And again, it's harder for the Niners to climb out of these deficits because of who they have at quarterback. So I'm not counting the Niners out of the Super Bowl race by any means, and they are. With all the flawed teams in the NFC, they are still my number one, but I would go ahead. And it's still tough for me between the Ravens and the Chiefs. I still, even after the disaster that we saw against Vegas, I don't want to completely count out Kansas City either, because I think their defense is so great. Again, and I know this is it feels like the 4th or 5th consecutive week I have come out here and said, this isn't the week to make the Chiefs' case, but I still don't want to count them out. So for me, the 3 teams that are ahead of everybody are the Ravens, the Niners, and the Chiefs to me. And the Chiefs are 3, but it's really close between all those teams to me.
Wow.
I'm on your side here. I would say Baltimore, San Francisco is my prediction, but Kansas City is right on the cusp for me.
Interesting. I don't have them in that same conversation. And I think that the Ravens are the most flawless team in football right now. I think the ceiling that we have seen from the Niners, though, how just completely dominant they are at their best, I think that's what sold most of us on them as the Super Bowl favorite, and I still believe in that. This was a rough game. The rhythm was thrown off from the jump because of the turnovers. And you are right, Logan. Like, we've seen, you don't get a sort of win-loss statistical disparity like Brock Purdy has if you aren't a rhythm guy. And if those issues don't compound themselves when things start going south, because that's what happened, right? The Vikings game, it's like, it's not that there's one bad mistake. There's multiple bad mistakes. It just has felt like when he's been bad, he has been bad. And when he's been perfect, he's been damn near perfect. And he was for 8 weeks up until this game. And then he was pretty bad. I will say one last thing before we move on to talking about the Chiefs. I feel like you're defaulting a little too much when we talk about some of these good teams, too. They go up against good competition, and they crumble. Like, they played the other top 2 team in football.
Yeah.
They dominated the Cowboys, who, regardless of what you think, if they're overrated, a good football team. They dominated the Eagles. Like, they have taken care of business. They dominated the Jags. This is an elite football team that soundly outplayed them, but it was also a game with a crazy turnover margin, the sort of thing that you don't expect to happen if they do meet again.
It's Shane Falco and the replacements, man. It's him in the Rose Bowl. It's that quicksand, dude. It's quicksand.
Yeah. Fair. Very fair. Well, speaking of quicksand, Logan, you know who's sinking pretty fast, but you are still hanging on to, is those Chiefs, who lost to the Raiders in pretty stunning fashion, where you have defensive touchdowns for Vegas on back-to-back plays, and Kansas City just couldn't recover from that. They put up only 14 points in this one. Are you officially in panic mode with them, now sitting at 9-6?
I'm going to quote friend of the show, Gabe Swartz, Kansas City resident, during their 5-year run of tyranny over the NFL. WHPM, we have Patrick Mahomes, is what Gabe would always say. Whenever the Chiefs were losing, whenever the Chiefs were in adverse situations, they could be down 2 TDs in a playoff game with 1 quarter to go. WHPM, we have Patrick Mahomes. Don't lose the faith. And that's kind of where I'm at with the Chiefs right now, Carson. This is an absolute disaster. This is the single worst game I have ever seen the Kansas City Chiefs and this offense play in the Patrick Mahomes era. And something that was so remarkable to me at the start of this broadcast, it's really hard to put into words now because we've been talking about Patrick Mahomes as the greatest quarterback talent of all time and one of the greatest QBs ever for so long. And I know it can kind of get tired and downtrodden how much praise we heap upon him. But, Carson, this was the first game in the Patrick Mahomes era where he had back-to-back 3-and-outs at home.
Wow, that's insane.
Ever. That's ridiculous, man. Like, at the start of the broadcast, that was going to be my takeaway, and it was going to be, oh, this is the worst start the Chiefs ever had. They just had 2 3-and-outs back-to-back. That's the bar. That's the bar, man. Dude, if the Steelers have a game where they start and don't have back-to-back 3-and-outs, I'm ready to throw a party, you know?
That's a parade, yeah.
Yeah, we're going to hang a banner. Got a first down on the first 2 drives. For the Chiefs, again, that is how bad of a game this was for them. And it was everything. Nothing went right. The sync with the receivers, the defensive TDs. You have a missed chip shot field goal from Harrison Butker. Kelsey is dropping everything. He pulls oh man, who is it in the Thurman Thomas in the Super Bowl, and he takes his helmet and he slams it. And sorry, man, not to bring up bad memories. Yeah, I didn't mean to do that. Thurman, fun fact about that Super Bowl where he throws his helmet. Thurman actually had to sit out the first couple of series of that game because the fan wouldn't give his helmet back. Somebody had to go and retrieve it and get it for him because it bounced in the stands. And shout out Andy Reid. That is a petulant child. That is how a petulant child acts when he is upset. I'm glad that Andy Reid took Kelsey aside and said, "You're a leader of this team. You can't be doing that, man. That's just unprofessional." You got tables breaking under Isaiah Pacheco when he's going to check on his knee and his head, man. You got Townsend booting multiple punts, 20 yards. Like, it was...
Yeah. How about Pacheco's helmet coming off to begin with and him taking a flying knee to the head?
Multiple times.
Yeah.
And what I think is so funny, we're all about player safety. We don't want anybody's head to get hurt. No whistle blown. No whistle blown at all. That would have been the first thing that I'd do. It was just everything compounded for the Chiefs and an absolute disaster. And ironically, because you're playing those Raiders, you got Aiden O'Connell under quarterback, and somehow at the end of this game, after all this has gone awry, you still have a chance to win this game. All of the second half and all of the fourth quarter. Big shout out to the defense, too.
Yeah.
But it was just an absolute disaster, and it's kind of the same thing about what you said about the Niners, Carson. Everything goes wrong. You have 5 turnovers, and the Ravens should have won that game by more. They probably should have 60 or 70-pieced them. You know, the Chiefs are still in this game.
70-pieced
I don't know. I mean, they should have 50 or 60-pieced them.
Oklahoma against McNeese State? Settle down.
They should have put up more points. They do settle for some field goals in this game. But, you know, it was an absolute disaster, and that's why I can't fully say that I'm out on the Chiefs. But this is a trend with the receivers, with MVS, with Tony, again, it started out as a bread trail of single individual plays. And we have seen this bread trail slowly build to where we found all the bread. We found the whole stash in this game. Yeah. And it was all spoiled rotten. Like, it felt like we were building to a head here, and this is where the Chiefs popped. Next week is the real answer to me about the Kansas City Chiefs, Carson. It's not this week. We've seen all the individual plays that have built up to this disaster of a game, and this is where it popped. Next week is the true test for me about the Chiefs. If the O-line can get healthy and can protect, if the receivers can get back in sync with Mahomes, and if they can just get back on the right track. Next week, if the Chiefs show up or don't show up, I'm ready to write them off and say that I'm ready to hit DEFCON 5. Right now, I'm not ready to. Next week, to me, is the true test. If they come out and they are, we got grass growing under the tires, I'm ready to write them off. Not right now, though. I have too much faith in Patrick Mahomes and this defense. I've been saying it for 4 weeks. I'm tired of beating this horse. I'm just not ready to quit on this team yet, man.
I'm not quitting on the Chiefs. I'm just more concerned than you are. I still have such deep-seated faith in Patrick Mahomes that with this defense, he is going to make the Chiefs a terrifying opponent to me in any single game. But you just can't ignore the trend. I mean, this team hasn't sniffed 400 yards since that Chargers game. That was 8 games ago. And since their bye, every game has been underwhelming. Yes, they could have beaten the Eagles, but they lost. And then they played a pretty good game against the Raiders the first time that they met. And then they lose to the Packers, bad game. They lose to the Bills, they get outplayed. They just take care of things against the Pats, I guess, but it wasn't impressive. And then this game, just a disaster. I just don't know how long you cannot be a good football team and I can maintain faith that you're an elite football team. I still like the Chiefs more than their record, but boy, these are real issues, man. I don't think the play calling has been as brilliant as we're used to, but obviously the biggest issue here is just the play of the supporting cast. And one of these turnovers is certainly on Mahomes, I thought. I didn't think that was a very good ball. He certainly wasn't in sync in terms of timing with the receiver, and then Jack Jones made a great play. And the other defensive touchdown, a little bit of that Andy Reid attempted magic, which a lot of times works out, but when it is a direct snap to Pacheco, handoff to Mahomes that leads to 6 for the other team, then you don't feel as great about getting creative there. But beyond those 2 outlier plays, I mean, you mentioned the 3-and-out stat. It just felt like over and over again, you're looking at 3rd and long. They were 5-16 on 3rd down. Could not run the ball in this game. Their running backs attempted 15 rushes for 32 yards. And boy, that Raiders defense played well, man. Like, I need to apologize to the Raiders. I do, because after they won their 5th game, I said these guys still suck and they're going to lose every game for the rest of the year. And then they went and they beat the Chargers by 42, and then they went and they won this game against the Chiefs. It's incredible, Logan. My favorite stat for a couple years has been that the Raiders haven't had a top 20 scoring defense since 2006, which, by the way, they were still 2-14 that season, and they landed the great prize that was Jamarcus Russell. It's just an unbelievable, unparalleled run of incompetence on that side of the ball, and they've turned it around here. I think that they have now built a culture, and I think that they have now added the right personnel, and I thought that they were great in coverage in this game. I thought they got a whole lot of pressure. Pat had to resort to scrambling more than he would like. Sometimes you're looking at like 4th down situations or 3rd and long situations where there's really nothing there. He just kind of throws the ball up and nobody's open, and it's almost like admitting failure. And I don't know when the last time a team had 2 defensive touchdowns in back-to-back weeks was. That, I don't know if it's ever happened before. Logan, get the stat guy on that. Get Jamie on that.
A single player?
No, when has a team had 2 defensive touchdowns, which they did against the Chargers, and then 2 defensive touchdowns the next week?
Double deuce. I thought you meant individual. The last time I remember a team doing this individually was Mike Brown for the Bears in like 2003. He had back-to-back game-winning defensive touchdowns for the Bears. Pretty remarkable. It may have never. I mean, I'm going to see if I can find that.
Dude, if you get 4 defensive touchdowns in a season, that's some Steelers production. Yeah. That'll swing a few games your way. To do it in 2 weeks, unbelievable. So, props to them for really balling out and stepping up. But when it comes to the Chiefs, I don't think they are hopeless in terms of winning the Super Bowl, because that defense has been awesome this entire stretch. They let up the 1 3rd down on that last play where Zamir White, who's also been really good these last 2 weeks, gets that big run, and that seals the game. But overall, I mean, Aiden O'Connell completed 9 passes in this game, right? They held him to 200 yards of offense. They let up 6 points, the defense. They are still doing their job at an incredibly high level. But this team needs to invest big resources in wide receiver. Like, the Chiefs need to spend their 1st-round pick this year on receiver. I don't really care who's on the board, man. You do whatever it takes to make that happen. And I do think we've talked so much about the limitations of the supporting cast, but Kelsey has taken a step back this year. Now, he's still producing at a very high level. He's still an elite tight end, but I mean, is he a top 5 receiving weapon in the game like he has been, with his ability to just dominate those intermediate areas of the field, his ability to sit against any zone and always find the soft spots, just the sort of matchup nightmare that he's always been, how good he's been after the catch. I just think he's lost a step in terms of that athleticism. And Logan, here's my take before you give the Raiders stat, which hopefully you found. I think George Kittle has surpassed him as the best tight end in football. I think he's obviously a much better blocker, and he always has been. But now I view him as a much more explosive receiver after the catch. I just think that little bit of regression in athleticism from Kelce, he's still damn good, but he's not quite what he was last year and the handful of years before that.
So I got Jamie on it in the back. Shout out.
Thanks, Jamie.
It hasn't happened, Carson. The way the Raiders did it with 2 defensive touchdowns in back-to-back weeks hasn't happened in 11 years since 2012. Wow. The Patriots do it in 2012 with 2 interceptions, 2 fumble recovery TDs, and a punt return. And then the Bears did it in 2012 with 4 pick sixes. Wow. Last team to do it, if we include return TDs overall, 2015 Cardinals. They had 3 pick sixes and 1 kick return. So, yeah, 11 years since somebody's done it exactly how the Raiders done it, and just return TDs in general. Nobody has had 2 in back-to-back weeks in 8 years, man.
Now, here's the stat that we won't be able to find, but that would make it all the more unbelievable. The last time that it happened on back-to-back drives in both of those games.
Yeah.
I mean, this one is literally back-to-back plays. Last week, I think it was like 2 plays of separation between them. Unbelievable, crazy stuff. But it's interesting to me that you still have that level of faith in the Chiefs, that you're not hitting the panic button at all, because this is what I've been saying the last couple weeks. Like, week after week after week, you wait for them to turn it around. You wait for that performance where Mahomes does just overcome the supporting cast and explode, and they look like the Chiefs of old. And when it hasn't happened once in 7 weeks, 8 weeks, that's concerning.
No, it's incredibly rational, but faith isn't rational, right? Faith is irrational. And that's where I lie with Kansas City is you hit it on the head. All I think it takes is 1 week, Carson. And again, I've been holding out for 15, 16 now, man. It is frustrating. But faith is irrational. And I think it's going to take 1 week. It's about football's stupid, man. It's like baseball, hitting your stride at the right time. And
for sure,
that's going to be a big key heading into these final weeks, because it was kind of a foregone conclusion that the Chiefs, again, we're waiting for them to hit this turn, that they're going to have a first-round bye, that they're going to have home field advantage too. The situation that we are quickly approaching with Kansas City is we're going to have to see Patrick Mahomes in a wild card game for the first time. We're going to have to see Patrick Mahomes go on the road potentially for the first time in a playoff situation.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to see Mahomes and this Chiefs team find it before the final weeks. If they can do it, if they can answer the call next week, if they can answer the call in 2 weeks, and they can just find a little bit of a rhythm heading into the playoffs, I'm ready to go back in on the Chiefs because I have that level of faith. But you're right. Rationally, if you were looking at the tape that we have seen on the field this season, the Chiefs have really given us nothing to say that this is the team that we should buy into, and this is why they should win the Super Bowl. There's really nothing on the tape.
If the Chiefs do win the Super Bowl, I mean, good Lord, Patrick Mahomes. To me, that'll be the most impressive run of his career, because I'm just assuming he's going to have to rise to just a stratospheric level, because this defense is by far the best that he's had, but this offense, the supporting cast, is by so far the weakest that he's had. I don't see it as a likely outcome, but I can't say that it's an impossible outcome, because elite defense and elite best quarterback in the world is always a scary combination.